Welcome to Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Australia is heading for a decade of budget deficits on the back of big spending by governments. But at the same time, public spending is the only thing keeping us out of a recession right now. It's all contributing to the inflation challenge for the Reserve Bank, which means interest rates are still sitting at 12-year highs, the benchmark at 4.35%, even as other central banks around the world cut them. We're finishing 2024 with quite the economic puzzle. Who better to put it all together than Chief Economist at EY, Cherelle Murphy? Cherelle, welcome back to Fear and Greed.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for having me.
The puzzle king, we're calling you from now. What do you make of the Australian economy with that MyEFO coming through in the last couple of days as we kind of head into the Christmas period and then into next year? Where does the economy stand?
Well, it could be better, Sean, couldn't it? Let's say.
Yes, true.
Look, I'm going to start with the upside though, right? So we've got an unemployment rate of 3.9%, which is pretty phenomenal. That's actually unchanged since December last year, if you were to kind of draw a line through the year. And that's, terrific news. Obviously, this is the kind of very human side of the economy. People have jobs, and that means that they can do a lot more than if they don't have jobs, including, of course, pay their mortgage, get by, pay for the grocery bills. Now, the not so good part, of course, is that inflation is still elevated. With underlying inflation at 3.5%, it means that the sort of purchasing power of households is not great. But, that too has come down a lot over the last 12 months. When we look at the headline rate, for example, it was 4.1% last December, and it's now 2.8%. So a bit better there. And the government's obviously been working quite hard to try and pull down that inflation number with rebates, and state governments put in place all sorts of help for households. But we're still not seeing the household sector respond to that very well. So basically household consumption is flat over the year. There's really not much happening there at all. We've got other things, kind of a bit level. So business investment is okay, but not amazing. Something that has been a very big positive for the economy of late recently is the high commodity prices, high export volumes. But these two are starting to come off on account of the fact that commodity prices are a bit lower. So look, we're slowing down. There's no doubt about it. And the labour market, if anything, is kind of a bit of an outlier indicator, but also very welcome.
What about government spending? The MyEFO came out. We're obviously in for deficits for the next, for the next 10 years, but in the forecast years for the next 4 years. You wrote, I can't quite remember the words, but along the lines of people know that there's a problem and they're starting to get frustrated with the government for not doing anything about it. Just explain that.
Yeah, so the spending that's in this budget is pretty extensive, and it's not being, I guess, recouped by the additional revenue that the government's being able to bring in. So in other words, the budget position gets worse because expenditure is basically growing higher than revenue. That means that the sort of overall fiscal position is deteriorating. The problem with the sort of, we just kind of can't catch up, which was sort of the line that the government gave us yesterday, is that many of these spending pressures, while not exactly known, have definitely been known from a thematic point of view for some time. This is the whole reason we have an intergenerational report, is to try and highlight some of these structural issues in the economy. And the last intergenerational report back in 2023 did highlight a lot of the things that we're having to fix up now. And that's not the first one either. You look back on those IGRs, the same story. I guess the difficulty here is there's a lot more spending, but there's not a lot of offsetting cuts in the budget to make up for it, and nor is there sort of higher revenue raising ambitions. Productivity, I think the government is trying on this one, like in terms of there's some new policy on the national productivity payments that just announced by the Treasurer recently. There's a big competition policy review going on. If it can genuinely use these types of policies to increase the growth rate of the economy, so increase the size of the pie, it can get away with it. In other words, it can spend a bit more. But yeah, you put all that together and it's just not adding up right now.
Okay, Cherelle, we're going to take a quick break and we'll come back and discuss government spending. I'm talking to Cherelle Murphy, Chief Economist at EY. How much should we worry about it? We talk about budget deficits, and we had massive budget deficits during the COVID period. We came out, growth was so strong, we seemed to be able to wind them back really quickly. We listened to Donald Trump about how much he's going to spend. Not for you, Cherelle, you're an economist, right? But for people like me, how much should I be worried about governments continually talking about deficits? And we have to pay them back at some point, I presume.
Yeah, and Sean, you're as good an economist as anyone I know, so don't underrate.
That's like a Christmas present comment, that is.
Merry Christmas. They matter because when we look to the future, we don't have a buffer, I guess, in the accounts, in the government's financial accounts. And we sort of need to have a buffer because we know things will go wrong in future. You know, we didn't predict the GFC, we didn't predict the pandemic, but when they came, the government had to spend a lot of money to keep the economy kind of afloat and get through that difficult period. So if we don't kind of rebuild our buffer, then we could be in a bit of strife when the time comes to potentially save us again. The other thing, of course, is that there's nothing wrong with debt, and clearly, we need some debt, we need some investment in the economy, but it's just the rate at which it's growing at the moment. It's rising much faster than it has in the past to levels that we haven't seen before, at both the Commonwealth and the state levels, I'll add. And we don't have a plan to pay it back, which basically means that we're going to pass it on to our kids. And I thought there was a certain irony yesterday in the childcare announcements that were in the mid-year update. These are great policies, access to childcare for more kids, increase in the payments for childcare staff. But ironically, it's these kids that are probably going to be paying for it when they go into the workforce. So, we need to kind of just have more of a clampdown on spending, or raise revenue, or even better than both of those, increase productivity in the economy.
So the next 12 months, what would you like to see happen in the economy? Productivity improve. There's one that you've said that. And maybe I should broaden the question, not what you'd just like to see, but what you think you'll see in terms of the unemployment rate, in terms of inflation, in terms of interest rates.
Well, I think the inflation rate will probably continue to ease, which is good news. I think the Reserve Bank will kind of make sure that happens by keeping rates at this kind of contractionary level. The unemployment rate probably will increase a little bit, and that will be reflecting the sort of slowdown in the GDP growth that we've already seen. There's a lot of unknowns, though, of course, in large part because we have obviously a new administration coming into the US. Trump has a lot of policies which could really upset the global trading system, could potentially cause some excitement in the short term and extra activity, but then actually cause a deterioration in growth later on. So, that throws up uncertainty. What would I like to see? I'd love to see some tax reform. The sort of number one thing on the list at the moment. And clearly this is not something you can design, implement, and put in place in a 12-month period, but we should be talking about it. We really have to get this back on the agenda. And ideally, it's quite a big, extensive root and branch review of the tax system, including how all the Commonwealth and the state taxes interact.
You didn't mention interest rates, Cherelle. I'm going to ask you, what do you think will happen to interest rates in the next 12 months?
Yeah, my bad. Interest rate.
I thought you were avoiding it.
Well, hard to avoid that in this occupation, John. Yes. Interest rates, I think they will come down next year. Probably not by very much, though. I don't think that the Reserve Bank is going to be in a position to lower rates at its next meeting, which is in February, which means it's kind of a Q2 proposition. It depends, of course, on how the inflation numbers unfold over the next few months and activity levels as well. But when you think about this from the Reserve Bank's point of view, the economy doesn't appear to need a whole lot of extra stimulus because the unemployment rate is really low, right?
Yeah.
But it does have an inflation problem. So the policy of least regret is to hold interest rates where they are. Just be sure that inflation story is evolving as they hope, and then they can act on lowering rates. But until they're sure of that, to me, it's like, well, why would they? Why would they cut rates at this point in time?
Cherelle, thanks for joining Fear and Greed.
My pleasure.
That was EY Chief Economist Cherelle Murphy. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.